All right, we are still waiting for one of our speakers, but we'll just hope he joins. Thanks for being here. Today is session 2 of the Virtual Power Plant Learning Group. We're going to focus on the business opportunity of virtual power plants, which is specifically what the value chain looks like. As usual, this is a participatory session, so feel free to unmute and talk at any time, politely. Please keep your questions on the business topic. Next time, we'll talk about the tech aspects of VPP. And today with us, we have Audrey from Portland General Electric. We have Wyatt from Gradient Energy, and Kristen will join us midway from HomeConnect/DOE. Just want to check, Audrey, are you here?
Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Hi.
Great. Hi. So yeah, I wanted to start the panel with a question, which is if you could talk about your, just introduce yourself, introduce your business, and tell us how your business fits within the virtual power plant value chain. And for Audrey specifically, since you're from a utility, tell us how PG benefits from virtual power plants, and tell us more about the customer incentives for participating in the program.
Sure. That's a really big topic that I could spend quite a few hours on, and I'll do y'all a favor and I won't. And I have some slides that I could pull up to just kind of provide visual aid. I don't know if y'all want to keep it as a conversation, and I can just talk the slides to you if you wanted me to pull them up and just to have a visual aid as I'm talking through it, or if there's any preference of the group.
Feel free to pull up the slides if that's helpful. Yeah.
Okay. Let me just make sure that I fully know how to work Google Meets here. So I am Audrey Burkhart. I don't know that I know how to share on this thing, so I might not. That might save us all. I just don't know that I know how to work that. So I'm Audrey Burkhart, and I am with PGE in Portland General Electric. That is a vertically integrated utility headquartered in Portland, Oregon, serving a lot of the I-5 corridor of Oregon. So Oregon, Salem, and kind of the population centers of the state. My job title is Customer Solutions Manager. I help design and manage customer programs that involve battery energy storage and resilience programs, which are highly overlapping, but not entirely overlapping, to the extent that there is a customer participation element. So generation, transmission, and substation batteries are not my team. Those are the, I'm sorry, guys, you're having some audio problems. I can try and sorry about that. I'll turn my camera on. That helps clear up any of my bandwidth here. And I can call in from my phone if it still is bad. Just ping me on the chats. I do apologize for bad workplace Wi-Fi. So I'm going to turn my camera off. So let's see. PGE has a lot of customer programs that we've been operating for demand response. But as far as building out a mature and robust virtual power plant, that's a pretty new muscle for us. And like with a lot of these emerging elements we're seeing in this space, there's not really broadly agreed upon for what is a virtual power plant. Some people say like we're dispatching 10 batteries, and that's my virtual power plant. Others don't agree on that definition and think that it is a collection of DERs. But at PGE, we do have, we've created a defined definition of a virtual power plant, and that is a power plant consisting of distributed energy resources and flexible loads orchestrated through a technology platform to provide grid and power operations services. So it's a little bit more robust than like a customer demand response program. We're really getting to be two-way, intelligent, predictive, actionable, visible, in order for it to be considered as part of this virtual power plant and sort of the North Star vision. We're also, as part of our decarbonization goals of the state of Oregon has a law that all utilities will reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 80% by 2030 and 100% by 2040. So in order to do that and still have resource adequacy, as utility, they're not school. I'm still choppy. I'm really sorry, guys. Let me try and join from my phone. Oh, I don't know that our firewall is going to let me do that. I really apologize for the choppiness. Let me see if it'll let me join the call from my phone.
Okay, no worries. Hi, Eric. Thanks for joining us. As Audrey figures out her tech problems, I know that you don't have much time, so maybe you could get in. Eric from Virtual Peaker, could you tell us more about who you are, what your business is, and how you fit in this whole virtual power plant value chain?
Sure. Probably good afternoon to everybody. Eric Van Orden here, Director of Partnerships for Virtual Peaker. Been with the company for a little over a year, but in the space of emerging technologies, utilities, and consumer energy consumers for 15 plus years. Virtual Peaker is a software as a service platform that enables, for the most part, utilities to manage devices for demand response purposes, and demand response in many different ways that I'll share a little bit about. Also engage with those customers when it comes to incentive processing, as well as reminders for demand response events, and then also doing forecasting. That I think between those three pieces that we package into suites, the forecasting kind of brings in the both identifying the peaks, helping to identify peaks on the grid, and then also it's still in the works, but is also kind of refining the estimates on how much load can be shifted or shedded from demand distributed energy resources. My role is with partnerships, so I work with a variety of different device manufacturers, from electric vehicle chargers, thermostats, automakers, and the auto EV chargers, the full gamut. And so they're all part of our platform, and a big piece of what we do, kind of that leads to the VPP, is integrate with those connected devices, provide push button access to, like I said, the utilities, to throttle those devices up or down, depending on the needs of the grid. I say utilities for the most part, because I know that there are a lot of folks that may be involved in kind of the DR aggregator space, which is also something that the DR aggregators may also use our platform as well to manage devices for their programs. That kind of the difference in my mind is engaging directly with consumers and then bidding those resources into the market, while the utilities are doing the same thing, but maybe also doing it for distribution benefits and customer engagement benefits, or aligning for renewable energy resources and clean energy too. To that end, that is kind of a nuance of who pays us, is basically the users of our platform, which are the utilities and DR aggregators that are looking for this push button access to devices. I'll say one more thing and then kind of leave it up for the rest of the discussion. But when it does come to the VPP side of things, I talk about demand response, and that could be your 10 peak days per year or 10 or 15 peak days per year, often during the summer if you're a summer peaking utility or region. But increasingly, there are motivations and opportunities to manage peaks or fill troughs many more times throughout the course of the year. And so I think that is something that gets more beyond just demand response and more into, call it DER management, call it grid services, probably a number of different things that are somewhat buzzwords, but also somewhat have meanings. The other piece of kind of, I think, that gets to VPPs is one is that more complex load management. The other, I think, is having that confidence of getting the timing right with aligning with the peaks and turning devices down to reduce peaks. But also, I think a big piece of that is that kind of forecasting component and being more confident in how much load you can shed. And that's really where it really becomes a virtual power plant, in that it's close to the equivalent of firing up a gas power plant, where a control room operator expects to press their button on a gas power plant and fire it up to 150 megawatts and get pretty close to 150 megawatts. I think the same thing in the world of VPPs is being able to do that and deliver on that amount that the kind of push button is scheduled for. And there's a lot of optimization with that of, like I said, identifying the peaks, being confident in what types of opt-outs there might be from consumers, what kind of other opt-outs there might be, or kind of risks of attrition from disconnected devices, and then also attrition from different devices that kind of inherently over the course of an event might lose their capacity benefits. And so there's some optimization potentially across different device types, meaning batteries that maybe fill the gap of thermostats in the last couple of hours as people get hot in their homes. So threw a lot out there, but I think that's kind of my view on the VPP world and a little bit about virtual peaker.
Good, thank you. Appreciate that. Anybody has any questions to clarify on Eric's presentation?
Yeah, just had a real quick question. When you have a device that opts in, do you have like negotiated restrictions on how much power or how much storage you can pull, or is it, free for all?
Yeah, each of the device manufacturers, from thermostats to batteries, and the consumers, often have some sort of contractual or terms and conditions type restrictions. And so in some cases of programs, it's no more than 3 events per week, or 20 events per summer. So that's kind of one qualification. Thinking of batteries, sometimes there's a limitation of how much you draw it down when it comes to the state of charge. So consumers or utilities enable the customer choice to leave some excess battery power in there for in the event of an outage or something like that. And I know Audrey can speak to that too.
Yeah, and I'm now on both my phone and the computer, so yay, technology and workplace Wi-Fi. But so we're actually a client of Virtual Peakers. We use them to dispatch a few of our demand response programs that we have. And a lot of it's determined through tariff restrictions. And so you set it up and the utility tariff will say, you can only do this much or that much. And it's really an art and a science of a balance between the customer tolerance of how much they think that and I just lost my I'm glad I'm on my phone. The whole network computer just went down. it's really a balance between what the customer is willing to tolerate and the value you can get out of the program or the pilot that you're running. So you could pretty, use and abuse these things and dispatch them every single day. But if your customers won't tolerate it and they drop out of the program, then you don't have a resource left over. So you have to balance the customer need very, very carefully with the system need when you are dealing with virtual power plants and actual customer resources. This isn't a gas-fired power plant that you can run as often as you possibly can.
Okay. So it's not just about hard limits that each device sets, but you have to figure out, okay, I know this device has set this limit, but there's a risk to taking it down to zero, for example, if it's a storage and that customer needs that power at that moment. So you have to kind of figure that out.
Yeah, the balance of resilience and the customer desire and the system, and none of the batteries that I work with will allow them to be drained down to zero. Even if you did a call for that, the local controls will always override the utility or the software dispatch, and will stop it at either what the manufacturer's setting has it at, or the customer's locally set controls. So if the customer sets a bottom of 50%, you'll only be able to draw down to the customer's delimited setting.
Cool. And do you have an awareness of that configuration, or is just try until you discover? I mean, is that somehow communicated to you in terms of, okay, I know the capacity that I can draw for each device, or is that kind of a mystery box that you don't know until you try to draw the power down?
I assume an absolute maximum of 80% all the time is what I can do. And then they'll sometimes have their own local controls, but I don't really have a good insight into that. And through the Virtual Peaker software platform, which is actually a really great user-friendly platform, and they don't pay me to say that, I pay them as a as a vendor, but it's a really good software to be using, and especially with batteries, we have a lot of insight, and we're able to get a lot of richness of data that we can see with the devices that we do dispatch and operate.
Thanks, Audrey. And I think those are the details that I don't know if there really is. There's still a lot of work to do to deliver, I think, what many of us envision for a VPP. There's great strides that have been made in that direction, but some of these nuances are the things to truly be able to understand what can you count on when you really need it in both economic, when there's economic needs, as well as, reliability and resilience needs. How much can you count on these DERs to be a resource? Like you said, from what's left in the battery to in the state of charge to consumer preferences and comfort in their home to other sorts of things.
And are there any business opportunities for a solar to actually power a local DR storage, or is it only basically peaker plant supplements? Is there an expansion of the potential market for managing this power aside from the peaker plant use case?
It's not necessarily a peaker plant. There's baseload generation with battery energy storage is going to be an important part of your decarbonized future. If you have no more gas baseload or coal baseload, you've got to replace it with something. Wind and solar are pretty unpredictable and get up and down. And so your firm non-emitting capacity is going to look like hydro or batteries. And so you're going to need a lot of batteries. And talking about that's kind of on the utility scale generation, solar powering battery energy storage with customer rooftops, they are inexplicably entwined. You don't have batteries without the solar. They are peanut butter and jelly. They do really great together. Yeah. And taking solar from kind of a bit of an unpredictable liability, because it is so inconsistent, and it's really hard to predict, and it's really hard to know what it can do. And you don't want to get like voltage or frequency issues on the grid if you have too much of it. Batteries are the solution to that. And so batteries are how you turn a volatile resource into a firm, valuable, decarbonized resource. And oh, by the way, your customers are the ones who have made the investments in it as well to support the entire utility grid and decarbonization.
But does a battery have to be local to that solar installation, or could be, maybe a city away? I mean, I guess that's what I mean.
It doesn't really care where the electrons flow. There are some local distribution issues that you might have to be aware of depending on the local setting. But no, a very large utility scale battery, or even kind of like a medium-sized 100 to 200 kW battery that's out where there's more available land and you can get the quantities of scale. It's basically like using the grid as your battery in that way instead of having it locally paired. You could absolutely do that.
Okay, but that's like a hub, right? Once it goes back to the ISO, then it's just in that pool of energy that storage facility would pull from, right? Not like this set of solar panels, I can somehow target that set of storage, a city away. Is there a way of doing it?
You can't tell the electrons where to go.
Okay. Once it's up, it's there, it's available energy, and then whoever draws it down, it draws it down. Okay.
Yeah, and I warned Benjamin, PGE is not in the California ISO, and I am not a structured market or ISO specialist or expert in any way. I can speak to the vertically integrated utilities that are not in a structured power market.
Thanks.
And on that note, could you get back to what you were saying before you cut out earlier?
Sure. And I apologize for bad Wi-Fi. It's a little bit embarrassing when you're trying to present like that. So PGE is a vertically integrated electric utility. We have generation, transmission, and distribution in Oregon. We serve about 2 million people, and let's see, the state of Oregon has legislation that was passed requiring the IOUs in the state to achieve an 80% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 and 100% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions below baseline by 2040. So we have some massive challenges of goals ahead of ourselves, and the virtual power plant is absolutely going to need to be part of the solution. If we were to try and do this all on our own in the traditional utility construct, you're going to have major resource adequacy concerns, and we'll have to overbuild the system massively in order to account for the peaks that naturally occur with system load. So we do have a goal by let's see, my deck doesn't say a date here, but we have a goal of 25% of our peak demand to be comprised of virtual power plant resources. Now, PGE's definition of a virtual power plant is a power plant that consists of distributed energy resources and flexible loads orchestrated through a technology platform to provide grid and power operations services. So this is utility scale storage. This is residential, commercial, industrial, demand response and flexible loads. It is customer and distribution sided PV solar. It's electrified vehicles. It's an all of the above solution that is taking a traditional one-way flow of energy and turning it into something that's connected, visible, and actionable so that we can use it intelligently on the grid in order to get to this 100% decarbonization that our customers, our lawmakers, our constituents, people are requiring of us if we want to keep serving our customers. So that's the goal. It's a very big challenge, and the industry is pretty nascent. So when I was all gobbledygook trying to speak before, I was saying that there's not really a widely accepted and defined or a widely accepted definition of what even is a virtual power plant. I think if we've all been following the industry news, there are some people who have, a handful of batteries that they're dispatching for demand response, and they call that their virtual power plant. Is demand response, if you have a thermostat demand response program, is that a virtual power plant? And I think PGE is saying, it's the orchestration, it's the intelligence, it's the two-way flow, and it's not just megawatts. It's taking all of the DERs and all of the generation resources and flexible loads on your system and using them in a cohesive and intelligent way to to do not just demand response, but also we need contingency reserve, we need frequency response. Flexi watts are the negawatts. I like it, Kristen. Yes, exactly. It cannot just be demand response. It has to be flexible and actionable, co-optimizing all of these different values. And that's how we're going to achieve full decarbonization. And I know I say a lot really quickly, so I can pause, but I didn't want to take up too much time since that was my second attempt there.
That was great. Could you share more about the customer incentives?
Yeah, so it really is dependent by program. We have a handful of customer programs that we're doing. We have, let's see, I have a list here in my deck that I couldn't figure out how to show to you guys. We have electric vehicles. We have large thermal generation resources. So like big old diesel generators, that's the original flexible load VPP. We have home batteries. This is a program that I run. Thermostats. We do some behavioral demand response where we send you a text and say, please reduce your energy usage. And if you do, we'll pay you for it. So, and it all is different depending on the tariff. The good thing about utilities is nothing is really secrets because we have to publicly file everything with our regulators and we have to file tariffs and provide a whole lot of information. So if you so desired, you could go onto PGE's website and look at our tariff books. I can tell you for the program that I run, the residential battery program is providing $1.70 per kWh during each event. So if we call a peak time event or maybe energy prices are just high and it's actually not about weather, it's about high prices on the spot market, we'll provide $1.70 per kWh that is dispatched and realized. The behavioral demand response program I mentioned, PGE's peak time rebates program pays $1 per kWh. And then getting into the other ones, it's like thermostats can be $25 per season. And the EV charge, so they just have kind of different structures depending on the different customer needs. That's actually a problem/opportunity as well. And so looking into how do you standardize the customer experience and not have customers do not care or understand utility tariffs. And so how do we get to a place where they don't need to know like, oh, well, I'm in this tariff, so I can't do this and I can do this, because right now they're all kind of like mutually exclusive and we're trying to figure out how they can best be co-optimized and stacked. And so you're not paying somebody 3 times for the same value, right? So we're in our VPP operations and trying to really rethink that the way that the utility operates. How do we streamline the tariffs, streamline the customer experience? And so when you're participating with us in any way that you're providing value, you're under the same kind of like umbrella program, and we're giving you, we're compensating you for it in a way that you understand. Because right now it is all piecemeal where, it's a very young industry. And so we were like, hey, let's give them $20 and see what happens. And that's kind of been the infancy of the industry. And now we're trying to get a little bit more sophisticated and say like, okay, we know the value of a thermostat. We know the value of a EVSC, of a battery. We can start to align them all up in a much more orderly fashion to make it so the customer has a more holistic experience and isn't like, our little guinea pigs in all these like 7 individual programs.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And each program is managed by someone different, and they would get like different letters and all of that.
They are fairly siloed right now, and it's because we set out with different learning objectives and goals. A lot of them are, I'll call them pilots, and they're not actually full-scale programs. That, you know, it has to be completely cost-effective, completely scalable, and it is a young industry, and it's a new muscle that we're trying to flex and perfect and make sure that we really understand the best way to do this. So for now, yeah, they're pretty different customer experiences. We're moving into the direction of streamlining them as you approach maturity and as you get out of this kind of like push a big red button, see what happens, see how many people show up. You can start to get a little bit more mature.
Got it. Cool. I'd like to hear from Wyatt and then Kristen.
Yeah, so hi everyone, my name is Wyatt. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Gradient Energy. We build and operate virtual power plants, specifically in California right now. Yeah, Audrey mentioned it, but there's several different definitions of virtual power plants. I was in the last call and I talked about this a little bit too. There's some really broad ones, and I don't think that those are personally helpful. What is kind of, I guess, like working in and building like virtual power plants, as well as like following like academia and like active research, what is commonly considered a virtual power plant is it has to be able to produce power and it has to be able to be dispatched. And so that usually revolves around batteries or even diesel generators, but that's much less common. So that doesn't include solar, that doesn't include thermostats, that doesn't include a lot of that stuff. That's just called, you know, demand response aggregation, as it has been for decades. Yeah, so that's just a lot of definitions. That's like a common one is it has to produce power and be dispatched. So that's at least like my angle, but it's like a never-ending debate. These are kind of a buzzword. So yeah, getting into the topic for this conversation, it's on market landscape and business models. Depending on where you're at, if you're in a regulated, deregulated state, or I should say if you're under an ISO or not, to keep it simple, you could either, with a virtual power plant, depending on the ISO, you either with a virtual power plant sell to utilities or you sell to the ISO. And within each one, there's several different services for both. It's nothing is really clear cut. Like with one of the regulations called FERC 2222, that's pretty recent, and it's important to understand the energy industry moves really slow. So one of the ISOs, MISO, it isn't going to have support, it estimates, for FERC 2222 until 2030. So if you want to, you know, build virtual power plant and provide services in a MISO, you're going to have to wait a while. Whereas with like California, for instance, you can do that now. So yeah, it varies, but generally sell to utilities, sell to ISOs, multiple programs within each one.
And can you tell us more about Gradient Energy specifically, what the business is and how you plan to make money?
Yeah, so with Gradient Energy, like I said, we're building and operating virtual power plants. So we're focusing on electric vehicles and what's commonly called like vehicle to grid. It's a very early field, but it's something that's, you know, going to grow a lot as more and more electric vehicles penetrate the market. We also operate, you know, stationary batteries as another option. And we provide that power to a utility, for instance, Pacific Gas and Electric, also called PG&E, an interesting coincidence with, you know, Audrey's company. Yeah, so we essentially, when an event happens, we control our customers' devices. They send power into the grid, and PG&E pays out for that power, and we capture a portion of that for the management, for the optimization, for the stability, and everything else. That's a common payment mechanism, but as with so many things, it varies by utility, by state.
Why, can you be a little bit more specific with like what car manufacturers you're supporting, or like how are you kind of segmenting the market?
Yeah, so there, with that, it gets into certain car manufacturers. Like Nissan, for instance, supports vehicle to grid right now. Tesla, being a really popular electric vehicle manufacturer, actually does not support vehicle to grid, but a lot new models of EVs are supporting V2G. For instance, like the Ford F-150 Lightning is, like really pushing this forward, and I think like Jeep is also planning on, same with like the Hummer EV. There's a lot of brands that are trying to support V2G for different reasons, and they sell supporting chargers for it. You do have to worry about warranties. So yeah, it gets a little interesting. What was the second part of the question?
Well, I guess like what stage are you in? Are you actively like doing this? Like, is the product available, and are you actually moving energy from the car back into the grid?
We have customers right now that are enrolled. The season, or it's important to understand that a lot of, with certain programs for demand response, they happen in seasons. So one of the programs that we're participating in happens generally during the summer. So like right now during the winter, it's, a dead season where we just sign up customers. And then when the summer comes, then we command them to produce, and they produce and we make money there. So it's seasonal, which isn't ideal, but it works.
Could you talk about your customer incentives as well?
Me?
Wyatt, yeah.
Okay, yeah, sure. So with that, we tried, there's the customer experience can have a big impact on this, or primarily how you communicate that. So how it usually happens is, like I said, they produce power, we command them to. The utility pays out power, we capture a portion of that, and we send most of that to the customer. With that, there's interesting kind of twists on that you can do to incentivize people. One of them is making the user experience really clear. And this seems kind of obvious, but like for every event, for instance, we estimate, you can produce $60 for this event. Like, can you still participate in this event? Or are you opting out? And they commonly see that number, they participate. With our software, all you have to do is plug in your vehicle, we handle the rest. It's not really crazy. I mean, with virtual power plants right now, they sound sophisticated. As with most demand response irrigation, this is kind of just my experience in the field. They're more or less just on-off switches. There's not a lot of optimization going on with a lot of them. Speaking, like, my background is in software engineering and machine learning, and there's not much optimization with a lot of these current virtual power plants, which I guess is disappointing. But if you're new to the field, that means it's an opportunity. What we're actually doing to incentivize customers, which I think Ben is trying to poke me for, is you can take that revenue, and under the California Emergency Load Reduction Program, based on the max number of events per year and the number of hours per event, they also charge, or they pay you $2 per kilowatt hour, which is super high. So what you can do is, if you're producing in amount in every event, then you can make on the theoretical maximum with an electric vehicle that produces 11 kilowatts, you can produce $6,600 a year. Like, this is big money, and it's not that many cycles being added onto your battery. It's not degrading it that much, but even with that amount of revenue, it still justifies itself. So what we do is we project the revenue over several years, and then we carry that forward. So in exchange for you participating in our virtual power plant, we'll finance your electric vehicle, reducing it by, say, $10,000. And then we capture a bigger portion of the payout during your time with us. And so it might be over the next 3 years, instead of capturing 20% of your payouts, we capture 80%. And so you still earn some, and you're still incentivized, but there's upfront incentive. And one of the things we're trying to do with this is we're trying to reduce the cost of electric vehicles. So this is a big way that we think we can do that.
I have a question on that, Wyatt. Are you kind of getting into like financial services territory when you're like financing a vehicle? With that, I have a background in fintech as well as a current foreground in energy. So what you just said triggered like credit review for me. Do you have any like overlap in that area, or are you able to?
Yeah, so we haven't financed any vehicles right now. The reason we haven't is because we're trying to get through a season of events. And a lot of these calculations, it depends, how many events, how many hours per event. And that has a significant impact on that. And there's not many prior data sets. So I want to calculate exactly how many, kilowatt hours are being consumed by, a certain are being produced by a certain electric vehicle. And when I have that knowledge, I'm much more confident saying like, oh, for the next 4 years, you participate, we'll get 80%. And in exchange, we'll knock off the front of your car $8,000 instead of 10 grand, or it could be 6 grand. There's several variables, so we haven't financed yet just because we want more concrete numbers. Because one of the unfortunate things is there's not a lot of clarity on these events happening.
Right. You could do like, I think it's like, and anyways, DR valuation is like best of sometimes in CAISO at least. But you should look into, as you start thinking about financing, look into state by state regulations for.
Yeah, that's why we're waiting. We're getting the virtual power plant figured out.
Yeah.
We're a young company, and we're getting that figured out, getting the calculations like down pat, and essentially develop like estimations, like bounds of how much we think we can earn. And then from there getting into financing, because you don't want to be hooked into a losing asset. So that takes time. But yeah, with financing, it's a mess of regulations.
Thanks.
Kristen, while you're here, thanks for joining.
Yeah, thanks for the last minute invite. I kind of jumped in and heard VPPs.
There's been debate whether HomeConnect is a virtual power plant by doing more demand response, but they are technically registered as a virtual power plant in a couple states. So I was wondering if you could tell us a bit more about the business behind HomeConnect, and how they make money, how they pay others, and all that.
That's the secret sauce. To be clear, I'm a former HomeConnect employee. I went to EDF Renewables PowerFlex after that, and I'm currently at the DOE at the Grid Deployment Office. So I think about VPPs a lot in my career. Specifically for HomeConnect, though, so they're a residential demand response aggregator. Right now, they're only doing like user reductions, or user, I guess I'd rather say user flexibility and consumption. I don't know how much is proprietary anymore, so I'll just say the way that they make money is by bidding into the market when they're able to automate reductions, typically through thermostats or smart plugs. If you've ever signed up, we use I have 1,000 of them in my house, little smart plugs that can turn things on and off. But thermostats are obviously the biggest load in a home, outside of maybe you have an electric oven, or EVs as they come on the market. And then they also make contracts. So like kind of thinking Wyatt, you were saying like you can, DR is still emerging market. So some utilities have test programs, DRAM in California, which is what I know. And also they're able to sell the product as a capacity contract to CCAs. When I was last there, that's what they were doing. They were providing that as a service. And a CCA is community choice aggregator. People in California, they probably manage your bill. Like mine is SF, Clean Power SF. EBCE is a big one, East Bay Clean Energy, and things like that. So there's a couple different ways. There's real-time market participation, and then there's also forward capacity contracts for reductions. And then paying users is it's always a big topic. Like how they do that and what they do that. It's hard. Like it's really hard to get people to figure. I mean, that's an economic question of price sensitivity. Like, what is your threshold? Because kind of as you go up the energy usage ladder, you're also going up the income ladder. And so like some people are just insensitive, like they don't care. So then you kind of get them on the emotional appeal, but then like they also like they don't care, like they just want to turn their oven on or have their house warm or cold. And I wanted to point out, while typically it is seasonal, summer is still the biggest load months. There are some spikes happening now in the winter, particularly there February of 21. If anyone remembers, that's when the Texas freeze happened. And gas prices spiked because gas production cut off in Texas. And it actually flowed because there's a pipeline that flows to Southern California. So San Diego, which is typically a very calm area, especially for DR, even in the summer, like was through the roof in February. And we just had like, it was huge market for DR for these couple of days during the Texas freeze. So even if Texas is not interconnected, they are impactful.
Z, did you have a question?
No, I clicked it on mistake. Sorry.
Okay. Well, Corey, go ahead.
Hi. Yeah, thanks, everybody. This has been really, really informative. One of the things that I am trying to understand better is if, so, demand response and a lot of these programs are essentially voluntary, right? And people can opt out at the last minute. And so what I'm curious about is from from the utility side, what sort of requirements do you have on VPPs to be able to sort of be able to depend on them as guaranteed resources when you need them to be?
So from my perspective, you're right. It's entirely voluntary. And the California ISO has different rules than we do. We're part of, so PGE in Portland, Oregon is not PG&E down in California. So we have, we participate in the energy imbalance market, and we're required to have resource adequacy, and we're required to have like contingency reserves and things that sort of like are the emergency backstop for all of our power. But we are not asterisk for the most part bidding in these customer cited resources into the ISO. So we just have different rules and regulations, and we're more concerned about like our own serving our own loads than we are about earning revenues through the structured market. So they're kind of different animals. And I think the conversation with Wyatt and Kristen just brings up how decentralized all of this is. And all of the rules in every state, depending on the utility, depending on if they're a municipality, vertically integrated, a CCA, all of these things, all different rules and all different playing fields. And so kind of like, there's no real easy button or one size fits all for any of this that we're doing. For PGE, you have, you make your estimates and you have your ELCC, and you just, when you're spreading out a resource among thousands and thousands of people, there's going to be individual variability, but it does become spread out a little bit smoother because it's a lot of small resources among a lot of people versus like if you have a big power plant that's 300 megawatts, and if it trips offline, like you better prepare yourself. But if a dozen people don't show up for the demand response event, it's not even noise because you've anticipated it and you know how to respond to it. So it does in some ways, if you understand the resource and if you've accounted for it properly. So like with thermostats on very, very, very cold days, they might not show up the way that you're expecting them to, because if they're fighting to hit the set point, and you can set them back, or I should say very hot days with air conditioning, because electric heat is sort of an emerging market. But on air conditioning, your air conditioning might not even be able to cool your house down to your set point. And so if you set it back a few degrees, you're not going to see any savings because it doesn't matter. Your air conditioning can't even get to the other point that it's trying to get to. So like understanding the dynamics of the market and what the resources and the technology is able to do is one thing. But when you do understand it, you just build in that variance and that noise into the thing. And so if you understand how many customers won't show up to an event, it's just planned for and it doesn't actually matter. The ISO has different rules, and you have to be like, they'll give you penalties and you have to make sure that you stay within a certain amount. And so I'm just speaking to a non-structured market perspective.
And I know with CAISO, they're trying to introduce like a more of a non-penalty approach. Maybe it's CPC, but like not like having no penalty for not showing up, and only the upside for showing up. And I just wanted to get this in. We have only a couple minutes, I think. But I had a good chat with some new colleagues at INREL that are actually studying DR, and I'm more bullish personally on commercial industrial users because they do have bigger loads, and their off-peak hours are residential on-peak hours, which is the more varying load. And they had some really cool studies that they're doing on like real time, maybe like 3 or 5 minute interval changes. So kind of like what Audrey's saying about the variance, they think the variance is actually the value with CNI customers, because you could see like load ramping up and you can slow it down or shut it off for 3 minutes. It's just like the technology isn't quite there yet, especially like 90% of CNI buildings are like very old stock. So there's a question of just installation and infrastructure. But if that future can become a reality, there's like the models say there's a lot of value to getting CNI users, but they're just as hard as residential users to convince of like, hey, let me control your thermostat. Don't worry, I'll shut off your fridge, but it'll be fine. You won't lose your entire like store stock. But there's cool work being done on VPPs.
Yeah, and it all depends on what you're trying to shut off and to do that. So like large thermal loads of like water or things are like cold storage, like cold nitrogen. You can do frequency response with nitrogen cold storage, which is super cool because you can send those little micro signals and really fluctuate it and do like some power quality things. But with a lot of our largest demand response participants, they have to have like a full staff meeting the day before and talk about how they're going to be like changing something for the next day. And it's very high touch and it's very disruptive. Mm-hmm. So you have to kind of understand the different variances and the types of customers and what they'll tolerate. You obviously can't do that to an assembly line, what Kristen just described, right. But maybe for like thermal heating or cold storage would be a perfect candidate.
Yeah, so Corey, another perspective on that question is we're what's called, or at least we're the layer between utilities and customers, also called like a third-party aggregator as their official term. And essentially there's, in simple terms, as Kristen mentioned, like you can get paid, but if you don't produce what you say you're going to produce, there's a penalty. And that's in the past, like, or at scale that might even out, or was like, if there's a certain drop off of like, let's say thermostats, it's not a big deal. But since electric vehicles are bigger, that's going to produce some new challenges, which is one of the things that we're facing actually using electric vehicles in a virtual power plant. And since it's going to be pretty common that the person isn't going to have their electric vehicle disconnected, the capacity factor of a V2G virtual power plant might only be 50% or 0.5 in relative terms. And so that's something you have to not only calculate ahead of time, but it turns into one big optimization process. So to meet that bid, you have to do a lot of complicated things. You have to first calculate how many people are going to participate in there. Then when the event actually comes, you have to calculate how many people are actually participating as opposed to who said they were but actually isn't. And then you have to handle drop-offs during it. So essentially kilowatts falling or kilowatts increasing during it if people connect late or they decide to opt in. All these complicated things, which actually makes virtual power plants almost, when you're dealing with V2G, makes them seem more like a balancing authority, and they have to essentially manage a bunch of small different power plants that are each electric vehicle. Yeah, I'm actually writing about this and I'll release a paper on it this year. Yeah, it's interesting. So I see we're out of time.
Thanks, this is really great.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Really appreciate you coming in. Thanks Audrey, Wyatt, Kristen, and Eric. We'll see everybody in a week for the tech session. Thanks again. Bye.